Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Ready to Launch panel. We're so glad you're here tonight. We are the BRYT Family Engagement Team, and we work with families all across the New England area to facilitate peer-to-peer support groups, provide resources, and help school clinicians engage families in their work. BRYT stands for the Bridge for Resilient Youth in Transition and is an organization out of the Brookline Center for Mental Health in Brookline, Massachusetts. BRYT helps schools build and maintain high quality Tier 3 general education support programs for students who are struggling with mental health and medical issues. There are over 150 BRYT programs in elementary, middle, and high schools in Massachusetts, and several other programs launching in New York, New Hampshire, Oregon, Chicago, and more across the country. I want to give an overview of our schedule for tonight. First, we'll hear from Kara Briley, one of our other family engagement coordinators. Kara is going to provide some context for our topic tonight and share some research that's been done around health and happiness. And then we'll hear from each of our panelists, who we're so lucky to have tonight, as they share their experiences after high school, either as a young adult or as someone who works with young adults. We'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. And if you have questions throughout the panelists' presentations, feel free to put them in the chat because we'll be monitoring that throughout the presentation. Lastly, if you're interested in joining our mailing list to hear about groups or other upcoming events, please feel free to put your email in the chat. Again, thank you to our panelists, and thank you all of you who are watching at home for being here. And now I'm going to turn it over to Kara.
Thank you, Lindsay. So I'm just going to share my screen with everybody so you can see my slides. So again, welcome to Ready to Launch. Before we jump into everything, I wanted to, we as the team wanted to share with you some context and sort of a framework for how to think about this night. And so I'm going to ask you a question. Remember when you were either pregnant or you knew somebody who was, whatever way your baby came to you, your child, we were always asked the question was always asked, do you want a boy or do you want a girl? And I think that 99% of the time we always said, I just want a happy, healthy baby, which is great. So what we want to talk about, or what I want to talk about today, is how do we keep that same desire and intention as our children become young adults? So a lot of times when they're younger, and even as they're growing up, we sort of have ideas and plans and expectations for them. But I wanted to just give you a little bit of information about what happiness actually looks like as we become adults. So these are 3 different resources that I wanted to talk about. And the first one is the World Happiness Report, the Blue Zones, and the Harvard Adult Development Study. And so the reason I share all these 3 is because they are very different research projects, but they all look at health and longevity and happiness. And what they've learned is that when we ask people what creates true happiness over a lifetime, the number one thing that comes up is social connection. The Blue Zones say one of the most important questions to ask in terms of determining your longevity and happiness is, if you have a problem, is there someone you can call for help? The Harvard Adult Development Study talks about how people who are in relationships over time and have marriages and continue to have adult friendships are those who report the most happiness in life. And I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the World Happiness Report, but it seems that every year it's a Scandinavian country that is the happiest, typically Finland. And one of the things they talk about for why people in Finland and the other Scandinavian countries are so happy is because they have community and sense of belonging. So I wanted to just share that information with you, and these slides will be available also. And each of these slides has a link, so you can click right to each of these resources so you can get some more information if you're curious. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean for it to play the TED Talk. So I just wanted to sort of bring the question back to or the answer back to that we just want happy, healthy kids. So that's what we wanted when they were babies. And that's really our goal for those kids as they become adults. And sometimes that means it's the 4-year college path, and sometimes it means a trade, and sometimes it means a gap year. It can mean all different things. And we just want to, offer you the opportunity to think about what might make your student happiest. And maybe it's not what everyone had thought all along. So that is my piece. There are some resources that we'll be able to share later as well. But I will stop sharing my screen and let Lindsay jump back in.
Thanks, Kara. So we're going to kick off our panelist discussion. I want to introduce Malcolm Pradilla. Malcolm is a clinical social worker at the Center for Counseling and Psychological Health at his alma mater, the University of Massachusetts Amherst. He's also an adjunct faculty member at Smith College's School of Social Work, where he teaches group theory and practice. Malcolm has previously worked as an inpatient social worker at the Brattleboro Retreat, a freestanding psychiatric hospital in Southern Vermont. He has experience in the public school setting, which includes leading a specialized transition program for students returning to school from therapeutic programs and from out-of-district placements. Malcolm's approach to individual and group practice is psychodynamic and committed to dismantling systems of oppression to minimize suffering and enhance the opportunity towards wellness. Thank you so much for joining us, Malcolm.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
So Malcolm, if you could just speak a little bit about your work with students at UMass and what you're noticing.
Sure, yeah. So, the University of Massachusetts has a counseling center. We've got about 35 different clinicians that practice regularly with students, grad students and undergraduate students. We've got a team of psychiatrists who can be part of that treatment if medication is going to be useful. We've got a crisis clinician at all times. So 8:30 to 4:30, there's a UMass staff member available to offer support. And if it's after hours or weekend or a holiday, we contract with a third party, but students always have 24/7 access to crisis support if needed. We run groups. We offer individual therapy, obviously. We offer workshops for students, which are basically like courses. They're mostly skill-based courses to figure out how to take care of themselves as they transition to college and as they work towards completing a degree. Yeah, and we operate kind of in collaboration with all other departments on campus. I don't think there's a department that a counseling center, not just at UMass, but in general, wouldn't operate with. Sometimes I think the counseling centers sort of unnamed goal is to kind of keep their finger on the pulse of what's happening for students. So what's important? What are the needs? What's happening, around us? This has been you don't need me to say, but like an unprecedented year. So we've really seen lots of different things. And it really does go back to what Kara was saying about connection. That is the healing power. It's great to be in therapy. It's great to, work out or sleep right, but sort of the life force for most students is having a sense of belonging, being fully seen, not feeling isolated, being able to see other people have experiences that are can feel normalized for them. So yeah, our intervention is mostly trying to meet students where they're at. And sometimes that happens with psychotherapy, but sometimes it can be collaborating or directing them to resources, or helping families understand what works best for you all as a unit. Yeah. I could certainly go on and on and on, but I don't know if anyone wants that.
Malcolm, could you speak a little bit about, for students that you feel like are doing well in terms of managing their mental health, like what are those students doing, and what's important in terms of managing mental health in college?
Sure. Well, I think there's lots of different things, but sort of chief among them, I think, is just the capacity to ask for help. that can be really hard to do in lots of different ways, whether it's academic or related to someone's mood or symptoms of a mental health issue. I think the thing we can do as a community to support students is really work to destigmatizing that asking for help, and then to be available pretty consistently with meeting them. I think the other thing that students are doing aside from asking for help is actually feeling entitled to the help. I think sometimes there's a sense of shame, like I should be able to do this on my own, or this is not as important because someone else is maybe suffering in a different way or worse than me. But the students that I see that are successful or can work towards meeting whatever their wellness goal, they have those two, I would kind of call them pillars, but the ability to ask for help and I think entitlement is actually supposed to have a good connotation in this sense, like, yes, this is something that's I'm allowed to have and might be essential for me to complete my academic goals. The other thing I'll say is being part of a community is important. I think for from K to 12, we're going to school with our neighbors and our people in our community. And so then you're in a new environment most often. And so having people that are very different than you can be overwhelming, but it can also be really exciting for students. And so kind of helping them understand that there's going to be a transition, that they're going to learn new things about themselves and other people, and that there'll be questions, and can there be questions with curiosity and not judgment or blame for having those questions. So it's kind of community, asking for help, feeling entitled to the help.
Malcolm, what do you think is important for parents to know about readiness to thrive at college?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've sort of been asked this in different ways before. I think actually parents know their students, they know their kids. I think there's like this idea that a licensed clinical social worker is going to be the expert, but you're actually pretty attuned. You've seen your child transition at lots of different stages of their life. And so I think as a parent, kind of continuing to do those things. Sometimes we think if our kids become 18 or if they go away, suddenly they're an adult, but they still have the same emotional needs, which are to, feel connected, feel supported, feel secure. So I think helping your child to manage expectations in the way that maybe you've always supported them, helping them to continue to ask for help, not disappearing, staying consistent. So if you have a kid who texts you all the time, like continue to text them. If you have a kid who's like, Mom, don't bother me, like, I shouldn't say that. Moms are supposed to do that, and dads and parents, everyone, if you care for your child. But I think like the limits and boundaries, and then I think trying to cultivate a sense of transparency as folks transition to let them know that you're actually available, and whatever they want to bring to you is critical. I think going to college, if that's what someone chooses, is a time where we can learn academically, but we're also deepening meaning about ourselves. So lots of things can come up. And so sort of pledging to your student that you want to continue to be part of that, I think is important and reassuring. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
How's our time, Megan? Do we still have time? Okay. What do you think are some kind of roadblocks or things that might get in the way of students managing their wellness, taking care of themselves? Like what are some mistakes you've sort of seen students make?
Yeah. Well, I'm cautious to call them mistakes. I think they can be huge learning opportunities because we're emerging adults. I don't know if people remember, I'm not that far away from it, but it's a wonky time. So we're still kind of just learning so much about ourselves, but the roadblocks can be varied. I think they're not unique to what might have happened, K through 12. Certainly financial things can be roadblocks. This has been a really hard time for students and for families. So access to an education can be expensive. It can be really hard to have employment and pay for school. That's a huge transition. I don't know that students have ever, or at least when I think about the students that come to UMass, it's not often that they've, well, let me be careful about that. I think a majority have had the opportunity to get an education without working. That's part of what happens in sort of privileged places like universities. Not necessarily fair, but for students that have to work or have financial strain, that can be really tricky. Certainly, I think what's happening in the world can be really hard, however you identify. Finding people that look and sound and understand the world the way you do and share experiences can be tricky. And certainly if you're part of a minoritized population, that can make it hard to feel a sense of belonging or connectedness. So these sometimes are roadblocks. Luckily, I think many colleges are prepared for this and address it. There's cultural centers, and at UMass, there's a Stonewall Center. There's certainly registered student organizations that people can feel connected to. And in terms of the finances, there are grants and scholarships. These tend to be roadblocks. I think also, like on a maybe less intense level, it's time management. I mean, middle school, high school, you've got the bell. The class isn't over until the teacher lets you leave, is what I learned. But like, there's also the bell. And so students are trying to manage time, and life can really bleed together. So it's those organizational skills. At UMass, we have a workshop called the ADHD Toolkit. You don't have to have that diagnosis to benefit from it. That's just what we call it, but has some organizational skills that are really supportive for folks. And we have other kind of time management type workshops. So I think that's another roadblock for some students. I think some students feel homesick if they're living on campus. They might not be able to name that feeling, but I think that's something that comes up, to be in a totally different new environment that everyone told you is supposed to be the best time of your life, and suddenly you feel there and you feel like you just want to go home. So one way we do that at UMass is we have a lot of first year groups where feelings can be shared and normalized. Like, yeah, this is not fun yet. That's okay. You're still adjusting. I'm sure there are some other roadblocks, but what I'll also say is what I've seen in students is how resilient students can be. I think sometimes we think that they're sort of fragile, not capable, but they've got plenty of skills. And so helping your student, your child, know what works for them, reminding them is important, and how to use it and how to develop it can be particularly beneficial.
I'm going to jump in real quick because there's a parent question for you. So one of the parents says that her son is on the autism spectrum and can struggle with social skills. So she's worried about what connection and what the community will look like for him when he transitions to college.
Yeah, I think that's, in some ways, that's a challenge I think a lot of parents are facing, certainly with a diagnosis for autism. There's a range of how people sort of make connections. And I think that, there are, like, through our counseling center, we have social skills kind of workshops. We have opportunities to meet, and be your full self. Like, I'm thinking of one group that's run called Making Connections. There are folks that are on the spectrum in that group. And so it can be sort of a safe place. I also think that, helping your student understand what causes them joy is important. I think on a college campus, one of the sort of thrilling parts is that there is something for everyone. So if making connections with peers is really hard, it might be, I don't want to say easier, but there might be a greater opportunity for it to be facilitated if they're doing something that they already find familiar, safe, and supportive and comforting. And it might be, again, not necessarily easier, but more accessible to have that conversation, to be able to delight in something that you already know, and to find someone who has that shared interest. It's definitely not easy. It's a tricky situation for all folks, but especially folks that might sort of have different, social needs. Trying to think about other things. I also just think it's, again, going back to those fundamental things, like when your child's in distress, can they come to you? Can they articulate it? And then can you still work as a family unit, as a parent, to direct them to the resource that might be beneficial? It might be therapy, but letting them know that their experience is totally typical and normal, and then directing them to someone that can help is always sort of the routine that I think UMass follows.
Thank you so much, Malcolm.
Sure, yeah.
We're going to hear from our next speaker. Ruth Kerrigan is the Director of School Counseling at Whitman-Hanson Regional High School and has been since 2004. She's committed to providing a comprehensive school counseling program that addresses student needs in the college and career readiness, academic, and personal social domains to help students find success in school and make a plan for life after high school. Prior to her tenure as a school counselor director, Ruth spent 15 years as a college admissions counselor director, a past president and active member of the Massachusetts School Counselors Association. Ruth has led professional school counseling presentations and workshops on the local, state, and national level. Thank you so much, Ruth, for being here.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? All right, great. Well, happy to be here with you. And tonight I come to you as someone who's worked in schools for a long time, someone who spent a lot of years in college admissions and a lot of those years as a director, and also the mom of now some grown sons. But I went through this process with you, so I understand what it's like to try to help your kids make a plan for life after high school. And I think, at my school, that's really one of our key focuses, is to have a student make a plan for life after high school. And I think the important thing for everybody to remember is that that plan doesn't have to be college. There are lots of other options. And I have to say that there was a time, I think, when I first made that transition from college admissions to school counseling, I kind of thought everyone had to go to college. And over the years, I have really made, really kind of turned my opinion about that. And part of that is through my work with the kids at my school, but part of that is also for the work with my own children. Just to tell you a little bit of a story. So my youngest son, Joshua, is a student who has a learning disability. And when he went to high school, he actually chose a vocational school. School was always hard for him, but he's a very talented, very smart kid. He went to a vocational high school, and I was certain that he should enter the engineering program. And he came to me and he said, "Mom, you know what? I just don't want to do that engineering program. I want to go into HVAC." So I knew nothing about it. I made him sit down with me and we looked at the Occupational Outlook Handbook together. Sorry, now my phone's ringing. So that we could see, well, are there going to be jobs in the future in this profession? And what's the salary like? And is that going to be a good option? And so we found that it was. So we went ahead and, he decided to go into that major, did very well, excelled in it. And then when it came time for graduation, I really wanted him to go to college. That was kind of, what my dream was for my kids. And he's like, "Mom, I don't know if I want to go to college. I've got this great co-op job." But he kind of, he decided to go. And I'm sure he went only because of me. And he spent a few weeks at Wentworth. And I think probably stopped going somewhere around Thanksgiving, but I didn't find out until December. And anyway, he definitely made the decision that that was not the right thing for him. So he went back to his co-op job. Since then, he's now 25. Working out in an incredible job, has his own part-time business, and probably makes $100,000 a year. So I think that's proof for everybody, is that, college is not the only way. So what I really try to talk to our students and our families about is that let's look at all of the options. So certainly college is a great option for a lot of kids. But there also are other pathways. Sometimes, the kids that we work with, many of them do choose four-year schools. Hopefully it's not just because of the pressure from their families, but many of them do choose two-year schools. But there also are some great options for two-year colleges. Our community colleges are wonderful resources. And when we think about our kids and the amount of student loan debt they have, we really need to rethink college for everyone. especially when you think about going into some majors that are just not high paying professions, we really have to just rethink that and look at tools. I mentioned it before, the Occupational Outlook Handbook, which is part of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, to see what professions are out there. What are people making? What are the projection for growth? If I make this investment in this education, is it going to pay off? So I think that's a really important part of it. Also, self-reflection and self-assessment is important too. Hopefully, if your kids are out of school, they're using a comprehensive school counseling program, they're doing interest inventories, so that together they can use those interest inventories, like we use a lot, the Do What You Are, which is the Myers-Briggs type indicator, a bunch of other assessments and strengths explorers. So by using those and by using the data from the college, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we can help our kids, make some plans and to explore some careers that aren't always college. So again, so 4 years certainly is an option. 2 years are a great option. Community colleges, I think, are really kind of the hidden gems in our system. Every year at our school, we have a college admissions seminar, and we always invite, we usually have someone from Harvard there, someone from UMass Boston, someone from Massasoit. And one of the reps from Massasoit a number of years ago always explained it like this. It's like we're all taking the same trip, but you're taking an airplane, I'm taking a bus, and you're taking a train. We can all get to the same place. It's just we take a different path to get there. And I think that's an important thing for parents to know. When I worked in college admissions, I worked at a 2-year school. So very often I had to deal with kind of a sense from some parents that a 2-year school wasn't as good. And I have to tell you, that's not the case at all. The school I worked at, we had a lot of kids that were coming in, getting great career training, going out, getting awesome jobs. And then some of them stayed in those jobs. And then some of them, went on to 4-year colleges after that. But again, 2-year schools can be a great place to go and get some training. Another thing I would encourage students to do is to look at vocational training, not necessarily college, but there are a lot of professions out there when we think about the trades, the plumbers, the electricians, the HVAC folks, the folks that do our hair. All of those are incredible opportunities for kids if they want to go into those trades. They're high paying, and they certainly need training and education, but not necessarily college. Another option for some of our students is the military. And I think we have to be open to that for our kids, because that can be a wonderful option for some of them. And with the military, I think sometimes as parents, we can be frightened by that option because we know that that could put them possibly in harm's way. But we also have to remember that there are some great training programs as part of the military, that most of the folks that go into the military are learning some type of a trade, some type of a profession based on their scores on that ASVAB test. They're going into different areas. And when they leave the military, they often come out with some very good skills. And in some professions, especially professions like law enforcement, where students need to take that civil service exam, having a military background can really help them and actually put them up on the list and put them in the top spots for some of those jobs. So that can be an option as well. And then another thing that we could talk about sometimes is a gap year. And when I say gap year, I had a student last year who I remember saying to me, when I asked him, well, what are we going to do after school? He's like, oh, I'm just going to take a gap year. I said, well, what does that mean to you? He goes, well, I'm not really sure, but I'll get a job somewhere. That's not a gap year. Okay. A gap year, you want it to be meaningful. And it could be that, maybe you want to do some community service along with keeping a job that you have. I know that one of our students this year, she's going to Stanford, she's taking a gap year first and doing a program with her church. So again, something meaningful that's going to help prepare her for the next step. There are some great programs locally, like City Year, where students need to apply for that program. They spend a year of service. I don't think they have to pay for that. They actually get a stipend, but they're doing community service. They're working out in schools, I think a lot of times in the city schools. And they're kind of growing and maturing and finding themselves. And then they're going to be ready for college if that's the choice that they make after that. There's another program called Dynamy, which I've heard about. And all of those programs, they stay here. There's also a program through EF, which is kind of a travel program. And I'm not sure what's happening with the pandemic, but perhaps when we're through this, that might be an opportunity for students to actually go abroad for that gap year as well. So if you're thinking gap year, I think that's a great thing. But again, think of something meaningful, someplace, doing something that's going to help you grow as a person, so that you're be ready to take that step after that year is over. But there's some great opportunities out there. And again, just think it's not just college. Let's help our kids understand that they need to you need to help them make a plan for life after high school, but there are lots of different ways to get where you want to go.
Thank you for all that amazing information, Ruth, and for sharing your own experience as a parent. We appreciate that. Our final presenter is Nell Keeley. Nell graduated from Whitman-Hanson Regional High in 2018. She attends Boston University and is studying psychology with a minor in special education. She'll be doing her first practicum in the fall at Central High School in Newton, and then graduating from BU in the spring of 2022. She's currently studying for the GRE, as she will be applying to grad school next year. While home for the summer, Nell will be working as a nanny, getting ready for her senior year of college. Thank you so much, Nell, for being here and sharing the student perspective, which I would argue is the most important perspective.
Thank you so much for having me. Can you guys hear me okay? Perfect. Yeah. So like you said, I'm studying psychology and I'm minoring in special education. I am planning on going on to my master's of science in counseling and clinical psychology next year. Hopefully I'll finish with a PhD at some point, but I'm just going to start with a master's. And, my main goal is to be a therapist and work with high school students, because I was just so inspired with all of the people that helped me through high school and helped me through all of my struggles. And I truly wouldn't be here without them. One of which being Caitlin, who is on the call right now. She helped me so much throughout high school and she inspired me to do what I'm doing. So I just wanted to say that. Thinking about my mental health and college was definitely a lot to think about, both when I was applying to college and then moving in, and now, and especially in the last year, it has been so difficult managing my mental health, because I just don't leave my apartment, I don't go to classes, I don't get to see my friends. And so I really had to make a point of putting my mental health first in a lot of situations, making it a point to be like, okay, on Tuesday, I'm seeing this friend and we're watching a movie. I'm getting out of the apartment, or it's a nice day outside, I'm going to go walk to get coffee. I'm going to leave my room. And I think just sort of trying to stay active and taking a break from the screen and doing something else is super, super important. And hopefully next year things will be a little bit better and a lot easier to be able to manage your mental health. I mean, before all of this, I'm a dancer and I joined one of the dance teams at school, and I've always used dance and physical activity to manage my mental health. And I just think it's always helped me. And I think it's a great resource for so many people, because there's so many different options when it comes to physical activity. Sometimes it's running, swimming, dancing, so be it. And so I've chosen dance. And so we meet twice a week, we do competitions, and it's a lot of fun. And it's also a great way to meet people. And part of my anxiety is I have a hard time meeting people and making new friends. And so that was a huge anxiety I had moving to college. I was terrified of meeting new people. So joining groups like the dance team was super beneficial to me. I met people with similar interests, and it sort of pushed me to make friendships. It pushed me to meet people in a safe and in a way that I was comfortable with. And another thing was when I was applying for housing, going into college, I knew that I probably shouldn't be in a single. And as enticing as it sounds to be in a single and not have to share a room with a random stranger, which can not always end well, I also knew that being alone would I would let myself isolate, and I would let myself not talk to people. And I knew that that wouldn't end well. And so I pushed myself to, meet people on Facebook who were going to be moving to my school, and force myself to find someone that I got along with and that I liked, and be in a room with them so that I wasn't alone. And there was someone there that I could talk to. And I think that is super, super important, is just not letting yourself or not letting your child let them isolate themselves, because that is just so dangerous, especially when you're moving somewhere else, somewhere scary, somewhere where you don't know anybody. You kind of have to push yourself out of your comfort zone and really just go head first, as terrifying as it is. Another thing that really helps me is when I'm super, super anxious about school, because school can be very stressful. There's a lot of work. I like to color. I like to just, put away everything that I have, just put on some music and focus on something else and not think about classes for a minute. And, that's not for everybody, obviously, but I think it's really important to encourage your children to find something that they enjoy, something that is not stressful, and something that can be a stress release, because that is necessary when you're in college, because, you're not with family, and you don't have that time to spend with family all the time. And, your friends have different schedules. So sometimes you're alone and you can't be doing work anymore and you need to do something. So it's super, super important to find something that you enjoy and bring that with you. Make sure you have that resource with you when you're at school, and use it as a coping strategy. I think that is just the most important thing, is to have coping mechanisms when you're going off to school, because it's not as easy to distract yourself sometimes. When I was deciding whether or not I wanted to go to college, because I did have a tough time in high school with various different things, I really did weigh my options, whether or not college was right for me, whether I wanted to take a gap year, whether it would just be too difficult for me. And, it really came down to when I was a senior in high school, I was in a better place, and I decided, okay, I think I can do this, but I'm going to, I stayed close to home. Obviously, I didn't go too far away, and that isn't going to be for everybody. I mean, some people want to go away, but I thought that being near my family was going to be the best option. So if I needed to see my parents, they could come into the city and I could get lunch with them, or if I needed a weekend home, I could easily get home. And that has also been super helpful for me. But it definitely was a challenge whether I wanted to go to school or not. And ultimately, I decided that all the career paths that I was interested in at the time, I needed to have a 4-year degree. And so that was just the best option for me. But like Ruth said, that's not for everybody, and that's okay. And so you don't have to go. I think some of the most important conversations parents need to have with their kids is they need to make a plan on how they're going to handle their mental health while they're at school. I made sure that I still had my therapist, and I was seeing my therapist, not weekly, once a month, if things were okay, making sure I was still in contact with my psychiatrist, staying on top of my medications, making sure that I was able to get refills of my medications and that I wasn't, letting it go low, but then also making sure that there was someone on campus or in the city that I could go to. And I personally utilized BARC while I'm at school, Boston Area Rape Crisis Center, for some issues that I've had in the past. And so just making sure that I have those resources and available and ready for when you do go off to school, I think is super, super important. And just having a solid plan in place, and not like just letting them get there and be like, oh no, I don't know what I'm doing now. What am I going to do? I don't have a therapist. I don't have anyone to talk to. I think that's, the most important.
Nell, thank you so much. I feel like, as a program leader for BRYT, like I know all of us on the screen are so proud of you. We're just meeting you. And you've answered so many of the questions that we wanted to share. We do have a couple questions in the chat that we'll come back to. But I really like what you were saying about setting up your mental health ahead of time for yourself personally. So making sure those services were in place when you were going off to school. What outreach did you do with your school in particular in terms of the services that Malcolm was talking about?
I, made sure that I personally made sure that when I was moving in with someone, that it was someone that understood my struggles, I understood theirs, and it I didn't keep anything from who I was living with, because that would also be an issue. I think just being open and honest with the people that you're going to be living with, and also just making sure that I had a good connection with my professors, especially if I was going through something difficult at the time. Made sure that I was reaching out to my professors, asking for extensions, asking for help with certain assignments. I personally haven't utilized like Boston University's mental health resources as a whole, just because, they're different with every university. And I just preferred to have like my personal therapist and my personal psychiatrist, because that's who I was comfortable with. And I didn't want to switch over, because it took me a long time to become comfortable with them. But I utilized It's On Us, which is an advocacy program at Boston University, which has been super helpful with resources and, being with other survivors. And we do a lot of work working with the university on advocacy programs, which has also been amazing. So stuff like that.
Great. There's a question that's related to that in the chat, and this could be for anyone. How does one know whether a potential school or college will offer mental health services and whether these will be a good fit for one's child?
I can
And there's
start.
a follow-up question. Sorry, there's a
Okay.
follow-up question that just came in with that. Or should a student prepare ahead of time, as Nell suggested? What about those without previous resources? So the original question is, how do you know if a potential school or college will offer those services and if they'll be a good fit?
I'll start and then other folks can take it over. But I think you have to ask, because you really don't know until you ask. And that's something that, when you think about all of the advertising and recruiting that schools do, they're not talking about this. So you really need to ask what type of support is available. I know that, for students with disabilities, there's a disabilities resource center on campus, and we always encourage every student to get in contact with them and see what their resources are. And I would think it would be the same thing for mental health. My guess is that just like in high schools, colleges are seeing an incredible amount of students dealing with social emotional issues. And my expectation is that this should be at the forefront of the services they're going to be providing. But I don't know, Malcolm, maybe you could take it from there.
Sure. Before I answer though, Nell, I just gotta say, man, congratulations to you. You're working so hard, and I can't wait to see you're gonna be on Psychology Today in like what, 4 years. You know your stuff. You answered some of my questions even, which is
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think Ruth is right. You have to ask, which is not always so fortunate, and I also think you have to know what to ask. So. Paying attention to what your student might be facing. If they have a longer history of, mental health issues, explaining what those are, understanding to what extent they're experiencing them is important. And if they're not, kind of considering how activating, that transition can be. So it could be good to ask the folks at the college or the counseling center, what are your services? Can my child see a therapist every week for 52 weeks? Do you bill? Can I know about their information? All that kind of stuff is important to ask. I think you're seeing a trend as mental health becomes less stigmatized and people feel more inclined to ask for help. There's a greater demand, and so colleges are being very clever about how to offer services. I'm hesitant to say what I'm going to say, but I think it's important to keep it real. Colleges are limited. There's a lot of brief and intermittent treatment that's offered, especially at a major public university. And so treatment looks really different for lots of folks. It might be more group oriented, and that might not be your student. So knowing what they're experiencing, asking the questions to see if the service actually will intervene with what they're experiencing. And I think you don't have to do one or the other. You can do both. You can plan to find a therapist that's close to home if you don't have one already, and you know that that's going to be important. And you can still utilize counseling services. Not every service they offer is necessarily going to qualify as like individual psychotherapy. So there's no issue of like double billing or, ethical things. It could mean that your students joining a workshop and also still seeing a therapist, or maybe they see a therapist at home during the summer, and in the year they're able to see someone on campus 1 to 2 times, in the semester when things get tricky. But I think Ruth is right. Ask the questions. You to some extent, you're the consumer, so you're unfortunately it's kind of corporate, but you're getting a product, so you want to know it's going to meet every expectation of your student.
Yeah, branching off of what Malcolm just said, especially depending on the size of the university and the demand of the students that are needing mental health services, it can be finicky getting consistent treatment. And if your child needs consistent treatment, needs to meet with someone on a weekly basis, it may be more difficult to do that at a university and utilizing the university's resources to do that. So I think you sort of have to ask yourself whether it's going to be once or twice, maybe during finals and midterms, or is this going to need to be a consistent thing, and just sort of decide on each person's specific needs.
That is such great information. Thank you all for jumping in on that question. I have another question from a parent. How can students research options for a gap year? Are there specific gap year programs? Because I thought it was just a year off before going to college.
Okay, yeah, no, it's not just a year off before going to college. There are gap year programs out there. You can do some Googling, but again, some of the several that I mentioned were City Year, Dynamy, and EF. But again, you can do some Googling, and I'm sure there's some great resources out there as well. And again, I think just make it meaningful. Somewhere where there's a chance for your student to grow and learn and be ready for the next step.
Ruth, are you seeing more people looking into gap years after the pandemic?
We are seeing that a little bit more. I would say our population is not one that typically a lot of kids do gap years, but we have a few doing that this year. I think there's certainly more kids, well, what I'm sensing, especially like with our juniors, trying to get them ready, coming into their senior year, I'm sensing a lot more of them are just very undecided, aren't ready, are really further behind in that forward thinking of life after high school than other years. I feel like we've lost a year with some of these kids. So we may be seeing more gap year programming, especially for next year.
Mm-hmm.
And to kind of piggyback on that, Ruth, what do you think parents should do if they feel like their child isn't ready to go to college or live away, but their child doesn't agree with them and thinks that they are ready?
Well, that's a tough conversation in the house. I think that certainly having an open and solid relationship with your child is key. And I also think that some of these conversations should happen really early. I think a lot of parents, I know, they have this idea that, oh, I want to do anything for my child. I just want to make, whatever that is they want, I want that to make that happen for them. But sometimes in the reality, that can't happen. It might be a financial reason. They might not be ready for that. So I think those honest and open conversations really need to start like around freshman year. What is it that you think you want to do after high school? And again, if you start to have those conversations at that point, I think it's easier. Bottom line, I guess, and this isn't probably a popular answer, but parents are usually paying the bill, so they usually get to make the call. Kids, when they're looking at especially private schools, there's no way they can do it on their own. They don't have access to the student loans they would need. So I think parents usually win because they pay the bill. But again, try to get those conversations happening a lot earlier so that it's not happening at the end of senior year, because that can be really damaging and difficult for everybody.
Thanks, Ruth. So this one is probably more geared towards Nell or Ruth, but anyone can jump in. So when it comes down to deciding your next steps, there's a lot of peer comparison with seniors about deciding on their next steps. And, how do you help a student, or how do you talk with your friends about choosing your own path and all the different choices that there are.
Yeah, that can definitely be super difficult, you know, when one of your friends is not going to school and, you know, they're going to start working, or you're going to different states and you're doing different things. It can definitely be stressful, but I think that as much as it is human nature to compare, you kind of have to take a step back and say to yourself, this is what I'm doing because this is what's going to make me happy, and this is what's going to lead to success in my life, and what they're doing doesn't really matter to what's happening to me. I mean, we can still stay in touch and we're still going to be friends, but they're doing what's best for them and I'm doing what's best for me. And it may take a little bit to utilize that thinking, because it's just so easy to compare and think about everybody else, but you have to really become a little bit selfish and be like, this is what I'm doing for me, and that's all that matters.
I think that's great advice, Nell. Yeah, I think that, you know, especially, you know, with the high school students, you know, they are comparing and competing against each other and vying for those top schools. But I think anything that we can do as educators and as parents to really get them just to think and to be introspective about really what the best next step is for them, that's going to be very, very helpful to them in the long run. Sometimes it's hard for them to see. And what I see a lot of times is students initially getting caught up in all the college stuff, going off to college and then changing their minds, usually sometime around you know, the holidays, at the end of the first semester, and they realize that maybe all that competition and that comparison really wasn't the best way to look at making decisions. And sometimes they're coming back and making different decisions after they've given it a try. And that's okay too.
Yeah, Ruth, I think this is probably a question for you, but do you have a sense of how different colleges, school cultures support mental health? If a college is notoriously high stress, high pressure, anxiety producing for students?
I would say that, you know, certainly I don't, it's my own opinion versus anything that has a lot of data, but I think that some of the very high pressure schools, the kids really feel that pressure. And I don't know what those schools might offer for mental health services. I hope they would really offer quite a bit. But yeah, there are some really intense, you know, we've had some students get into some very, very competitive colleges. And, you know, I've talked with some of the kids and they've said, you know, I almost didn't stay because it was just so intense. But then, you know, realizing, you know, when you're at an Ivy League school, it's to your benefit to stay and make it work and get that diploma. But yeah, I would hope that those schools would offer some great programming, and I think they probably do. I don't know, Malcolm, if you have any info on that.
Yeah, I don't have any like solid data, but I do think maybe this is sort of the earthy, crunchy answer. I do think it kind of comes back to the family. What's your family's relationship to stress? Does your student know what their limit is? Can they set boundaries? Can they ask for help? So whether you're going to a 2-year college or Yale, it's really based on, you know, what's their distress tolerance capability. Because I mean, you could have the best counseling center in the world, but if your student doesn't know that they need help or they're afraid to ask for help, it's not gonna work. So yeah, just helping them understand what their limits are, helping them ask for help.
I mean, from my own personal experience, BU is regarded as a high stress environment, and it's very, very competitive. And I've definitely felt that stress. And all of my friends, you know, some of my friends who have a lot of anxiety will just coop themselves up in their rooms studying and studying, because BU likes to be known for having the hardest finals, and they don't want to change that because they like that reputation. But the students have to keep that in mind when they're entering a certain university, just being like, am I going to be able to handle this, or is this going to be too much for me? And that can sometimes be a difficult thing to face, because a student will fall in love with a university and really, really want to go and like the program and like the environment, but it just might be too much for them. And that's okay if they need to take a step back and go somewhere else, because it's a calmer environment. And there have definitely been points where I thought about transferring to another university because it was too much, and it was a lot, and it was almost not worth it for my mental health. I mean, thankfully I was able to find new coping strategies and figure that out for myself so that I didn't have to, but that's totally okay. If you get somewhere, realize that it's way, way too much. It's definitely important to prioritize your mental health above all else, the name that's on your degree, and whatever else you think is more important.
That's a really good point. And what would that look like? So if a student, now you talked about transferring and going to a school that was less pressured environment, but what would a mental health leave look like if a student needed a pause?
I'm not sure if that was for me, but yeah, I mean, it can look lots of different ways. I think at least at UMass, students can, I think we actually do a lot of work with the Disability Service Office. Kind of gets funky with labels. I'm not really big on that label, but it's really more about accommodations and resources. So if you're having mental health issues, a lot of times we can kind of work with the student and the Disability Service Office to kind of change the stressors, whether it means more time or taking a test in a separate space or being able to, receive the information ahead of time. These can be small things that might reduce stress. The other thing is you can withdraw from a course, and that could be something that you just go see a therapist for one session and say, here's what's going on. What would it look like? Can I keep my financial aid? And like, is there any shame around it? It might just be that. And then certainly you can withdraw, I think, from almost any university. There, I think probably everyone, there are implications financially when you do it and how you do it. But for most students, it's a pretty smooth process, at least leaving the university. Oftentimes students are gone for, different schools have different policies, but it could be 1 semester, it could be 2 semesters before you return. And a lot of times universities will have like a readmission kind of, interview with different departments, might include the counseling center, to see what's shifted between when you left the university and you coming back, whether it might have just been, not just, but a response to stress, but it also can be a time in someone's life where they realize they have a bipolar disorder and they've had to figure out what works to manage those symptoms, or perhaps there's something traumatic that happens in the family or loss. So making sure things are in place is key too, because at the end of the day, I think Ruth has kind of created a snapshot. This is a huge financial decision. So if you have the endurance, great, but if you don't, you want to kind of come out of it with your mental health and also some money in your wallet too, not to be so frank.
Thank you. Just to ask a few follow-up questions about that. So different levels of that. So let's say a student was diagnosed with bipolar and did start to decline in their mental health and possibly needed a mental health hospitalization. They needed inpatient hospitalization. So not very long. So what would happen then? Who would they need to notify? What
Yeah,
would be the next steps for them?
my experience is that this is not uncommon, just sort of clinically, this is when those kind of symptoms tend to emerge in this emerging adult area. So universities are pretty well oiled in terms of supporting families and students, I think. So if someone was maybe having a manic episode and was hospitalized for 5 or 6 days and wanted to return to the university, typically they'll have a counselor in the counseling center and maybe also someone from the Dean of Students office, act as a liaison between the treatment team in the hospital. It depends. If a client is already part of our system, then we would reach out to them. But if not, then it would require the client or the client's family to reach out to the university. Don't have to be super specific, but can say that there's a need for hospitalization. Doesn't even have to be related to mental health. And then those organizations like the Dean of Students office will communicate with professors, and just make it so that students can kind of keep the trajectory towards graduation. So I guess the short part of it is, it's not often that that's like a super bump. The bump is treating their mental health issue, but schools are pretty good at accommodating. They want students to be successful. Sorry, that's my dog.
Thank you. I think that's important to think about, that those little blips and readjustments and calibrations that need to happen aren't the end of the road. I think that's an important takeaway. for families. Yeah. So unless a student reaches out, Malcolm, unless a student comes to the office and says, I need support, how would a college identify that a student is struggling? Or do they? Or what would that look like?
Yeah,
If
I
a
mean, I
student,
think,
sorry, just to finish my
yeah.
question. If a student does have a hard time connecting and reaching out and asking for help and, is maybe in their dorm room alone, what are the options of recognizing that student is having a hard time?
Yeah. So there, I mean, I'll always go back to family. I think staying in connection with your student and paying attention to things that don't feel typical to how you understand them and don't feel necessarily in the context of a transition is useful. But I think there are a couple of like fail safes within any institution, like a higher ed institution. So most, if you're living on campus, there'll be res life. So there are students and full-time staff that are trying to facilitate building community, but are also kind of eyes and ears to pay attention to what the needs of students could be. So sometimes that might be an RA saying, hey, I noticed like you don't seem to come to XYZ. How are you doing? And it could result in a referral to any organization on campus, including the counseling center. And many of those students are actually trained, and so are their staff. We actually offer an in-service to residents' life on how to notice things that might be concerning. The other thing is professors are calling our office all the time. They're sort of also trained to like notice things in emails like, hey, I got this email at 3 a.m. What's up with that? That seems interesting. And so they'll call. We still follow HIPAA, but they can kind of give us a little bit of a lead that they're concerned about a student. And then there is a kind of a aggressive campaign, knowing that students are, things are just more acute lately, especially after the pandemic. So I think practitioners on campus are going out almost like a campaign. At UMass, we have an informal way to reach students. It's called Let's Talk. It's on a couple of, or not couple, but it's on different university campuses. And it's an opportunity to talk with a counselor without things being documented, without a diagnosis and a treatment, just a very informal way to sort of exchange things. So that can be pretty accessible for students. And I know a lot of colleges do things similar to that.
That's so great. So I have a question for Nell now. What is one thing you wish you had known before leaving high school that would have made the transition after high school better for you?
Oh God, that's a good question. How lonely it'll be. Although you are in a dorm and you're surrounded by people, it can feel very, very lonely, especially if you're not making friends as fast as you thought you were going to. You're not seeing your family as much. You're not seeing your old high school friends as much, and you're not really talking as much because, they're off doing their own things now too. So it's very lonely, and you kind of need to prepare yourself for that, but also be like, okay, I need to really just put myself out there as soon as I get there, make connections with the people who live down the hall. You don't have to be best friends with your roommate, but try and make connections with your roommate. Just really get out of your comfort zone and just really try to make as many connections as possible, because you need that support there to help you and keep you from becoming too lonely or too homesick. Yeah, I think that's what I wish I knew.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. I think that's a really important thing that people don't think about. Although I have heard that bringing a door stopper to college is really important, that you wedge your door open and then you just kind of have this flow of seeing people. I always like that idea. We have another question in the chat from a parent. How does a student handle a history of mental health issues when applying for college? Does one disclose?
Well, that's a good question. I think you have to be careful. And I think a lot of students, especially when it comes to the time when they're writing their essays, this is where they often put information that perhaps they should not put into a college essay. And I'm giving this information as we have a college essay writing workshop that we do every year at our school, where we have all of our kids write their essays with their English teachers. We then partner with college admissions folks who we send the essays out, they read them, they come back and they meet with our kids. And so a lot of this information I'm sharing is directly from them. College is trying to build a community, and they want to make sure that what you are presenting will help them see that you're going to be a good roommate and a good classmate and a good teammate. And I think you have to be careful about red flags that you might share, because that honestly could prevent you from getting into a school. They may not ever tell you that, but that's a possibility. I know every year when we do this project, some of our students will write about things, and the college admissions reps will contact the counselors and say, hey, just wanted to let you know, I'm not sure if you saw this essay, but the student wrote about this, and really concerned for them. So I think you have to be really careful and judicious about sharing that information. You want to make a choice that's going to be right for you, but you don't want to put yourself out there as an admissions risk. Schools don't want to put themselves in a situation where they're dealing with a student that could potentially have some really difficulties. So that's may not be the answer that you want, but I think that's the truth in terms of what I've heard from college admissions folks over the year. Malcolm, if you have anything to add about that.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think Ruth has a lot of good points. Actually, little known fact, I used to be an admissions counselor before I became a therapist. What I can say is that I think it's a student's choice, and that there are consequences, positive and negative, for doing either or. When students did disclose, the university I worked for, we had kind of a queue. It wasn't sort of a scarlet letter. It was just students that we wanted to follow up with individually. So if they met the expectations of being able to come to the university, we could kind of meet them at the gate with resources, saying, you wrote about an eating disorder. Here are some resources, or what do you think you need? So I guess there's pros and cons. I'm sure there are some universities that wouldn't admit that that was disqualifying, and I think that there are some institutions that will meet you where you're at. I guess the question that the student would want to ask themselves is, why is it that I want to share this particular part of myself? What's the function for me? It might mean just starting the chapter saying, I'm going to be my full self, and I want to go somewhere where I can actually feel a sense of belonging. And it might be because that's just what's most relevant at the moment, and there's something else more interesting if they take a moment to think about it. So asking yourself why you want to share that without any judgment, just being curious.
Thank you. That's a really great question, and I think a lot of parents, that's a question for a lot of parents. Sort of to add to that, another question is, what role should parents play? And this would be for you, Ruth. What role should parents play with their high school counseling department when deciding what comes next for their child after high school?
Well, I think it's very important for parents to remember that this is the journey for their children, not for them. So, if you are filling out your child's common application and writing their essay, you should not be doing that. And we see that a lot. A student will come in and have a question about SATs, and we're like, well, let's, log into your account. Like, I don't know that. My mother created that account for me. So I think for a parent, you want to be a partner with your child and be beside them, guiding them, but this is their road, and support them. But, if they're not able to do this process, then they're probably not ready for college. They, guide them, support them, but understand that it's really their journey. And in terms of finding the next steps, I think it's fine for parents to be reaching out to counselors. We love to meet with parents and kids together when we're doing post-secondary planning. And I love it when parents are part of that discussion. So I would certainly reach out for counselors for that. But, prod your child and support them. But anything you can do to encourage independence and for them to become their own self-advocates will serve them well, as they get toward the end of high school, and certainly when they get to college, because once they get into college, you don't have access to their information for the most part. And you want to make sure that you equip them with the skills so that they can handle these things.
And now I guess a follow-up question for you is, do you have any advice for parents parents whose students are ready to transition after high school? So kind of just thinking about that and that independence and the things that the student themselves has to go through and those steps and that process. What advice would you give to parents having gone through that as a student?
I think the biggest thing is to be as supportive as possible without being suffocating, because sometimes some parents are a little too stressed out and it's all out of love and they want the best for you, but it can be a little bit too much. And, you know, at 17 or 18, kids are starting to want their independence. They're starting to want to come into their own. And when their parents are, you know, on their backs about everything, it can cause a lot of tension, as I've seen myself, and it can, you know, not end the way that it should. The kids might not go to the right school for them. So I think just be as supportive as possible. Make sure that your student knows that you are there for them to talk, but also try and let them do as much as they want to do on their own, because I think that's the most important, is letting them learn that independence and have that independence that they're craving at that point in their life.
Thank you. Another thing that I'm curious about, Nell, if you can speak to this a little bit, is, you know, one of the things that we talk about with families and our parent support groups is this idea, especially during a mental health crisis, is to pause expectations. Generally, when that happens, it's like, what about college? What about their future, right? There's a lot of fear, there's a lot of anxiety. So I guess I'm curious from your perspective, if you have any advice regarding expectations and future, and then maybe for your own process, what that thought process was like for you through those times that you struggled, and just kind of being able to um, do that pause around expectations, or that process for you.
Yeah, that can definitely be super difficult. For me in particular, I have a lot of anxiety surrounding school and doing the best that I can do. And I just want to excel. And so when I'm going through a mental health crisis and I'm starting to fall behind in my classes, that can cause more anxiety because I'm not doing as well as I want to be. And it's just this cycle, and it gets worse and worse and worse. But yeah, you have to pause and just be like, okay, my mental health comes first. If I don't take care of this first, then my school isn't going to get any better. And so I might be behind for a week, but that's okay. I'll catch up. My professors will be understanding. And so sort of my thought process is recognizing in myself that I'm struggling in the moment. And that can take a bit of time. Sometimes you just want to keep going and going and going, and you don't want to recognize that you're not doing well. And so that's sort of my first step, is just being like, taking a breath and being like, okay, I need help. And, you know, my first instinct is to call my parents. I call my parents and I say, hey, I'm not feeling well. I'm having so much anxiety. I am, you know, feeling really, really down. And the first thing my dad says to me is, do you have any homework that's due tomorrow? And most of the time it's no. And he's like, okay, shut off your computer, go for a walk, go to Target, buy a drink, get out of your apartment, calm down. That's sort of my first thing, is I need to calm myself down. I need to get out of this little bubble that I've put myself in. And I take sort of the rest of the night to myself to really take care of myself, watch a movie, eat ice cream. I don't know, whatever makes you feel better. And then the next morning I'll text my therapist and be like, hey, when's your next availability? When can I talk to you? Or text my psychiatrist and be like, hey, can I talk to you? I think I need to change my medication. And if you're in a position where you're really behind in your studies, or you have a paper that's due or an exam, I think it's super beneficial to reach out to that professor and just be like, hey, this is what's going on. I can get you a letter from my doctor, but can I have an extension? Can I take this exam next week? I just need to take care of myself first. And from my experience, every professor that I've had has been like, that's totally fine. Take care of yourself. That's more important. And so you can't you can't excel in school if you're struggling yourself. So I think just the most important thing is take care of yourself. Your studies are going to get done. It's all going to get done. You're going to survive the semester, but you're not going to if you don't take care of yourself first. So I think that's just the biggest thing that students and parents need to realize, is that that's what's most important, not the paper that's due in the morning.
No, that was great. Thank you so much. Ruth, this might be for you, but anybody can jump in. What are some of the biggest worries and fears that you hear from students and their families about deciding their next steps and taking that next adventure in life?
Well, I think, for what I hear a lot from parents is they just want to know how to help their child. And it depends on the community that you're in. If it's a community where many parents have, gone to college before, then they kind of get an idea of how it all works out. But if you're in a community with a lot of first generation college students, that's really, I think, one of the biggest fears that they have in terms of, helping their child. So I think what I would say is, use your school counselors at your schools. I know at our school, we do a lot of programming for parents. We're inviting them to participate in Naviance night and college admissions seminar and junior college coffee with the counselors. So there are most schools have a lot of programming, and they want to support you and your child and take advantage and participate. And also, I would say, get to know your school counselor. And counselors have, depending on caseloads, maybe 250 kids, and that's a lot of kids to get to know really well. But I think students, best thing you can do is to really get to know your counselor so that they can help you. And I know, I have a lot of, good relationships with many parents, and I think, the parents that really reach out, that really ask for that help, we get to know them during those college planning sessions. I think those parents really feel at ease and feel that, together we're going to be partners and we can get through this together and help them make their way. So reach out to your school counselors and get to know them.
Thanks, Ruth. So I want to ask you each to comment. So what is one piece of advice, after listening to everything tonight and hearing each other, that you that you would like to leave everybody with tonight after hearing everyone talk?
I guess I'll go first. The piece of advice I think I would give is to not be afraid to ask for help, whether it's from a parent, a roommate, a friend, or a therapist. I think, as difficult as it can be to reach out and as vulnerable as it can feel, I think you have to in some moments. And so I think just to get rid of that stigma that's in your head and, just sort of say, I need help. I'm going to reach out for help, because that is the best thing that you can do for yourself most of the time.
I think that's great advice, Nell. I think for me, one of the things to, I guess, just remember is that kids get into, and parents get into this frenzy, the college admissions frenzy, especially in the fall of senior year. And they're so worked up and, if I only go to this school, that's going to be the best thing for me. And I guess I want you just to take a breath and know that it is going to be okay. Even if maybe you didn't get into the school of your dreams, you're going to be okay. And, every year when we have students come back after they've graduated, it's just so refreshing to hear, the good stories and the great opportunities they have. And if for some reason that first choice doesn't work out, it's also okay to take a step back, pivot, and go in a new direction with another school. But at the end of the day, you're going to be okay, and ask for help when you need it.
Yeah, I think, Nell, you took mine of asking for help. I think that's just essential, even past college or trade school or gap year. But I think what everyone said is just to kind of divorce yourself from the idea that there's a right way to do something, and sort of approach these things curiously, but also intentionally. Have a little fun when you're doing it. No right way to do anything. That's what I was hearing from Nell and from Ruth.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everybody. My name's Megan, and I just want to thank everybody, the panelists, for that collection of incredible wisdom. And I'm going to, as we round off, we just have a few more minutes, and I wanted to share two things with everybody tonight. I'll start with, we, as BRYT, which BRYT is a network that supports schools, supports students, supports families around mental health in schools. And during this time of change, and during this period where there's an incredible high level of anxiety, we have talked about this mantra for building resilience during these times of change. And some of this is taken from Dr. Bruce Perry, but I wanted to share this with you because I'm struck by the 5 elements of this mantra were echoed again and again and again in our panelists' wisdom tonight. So I just want to share that. So the first piece of it is around practicing self and collective care, right? So we heard that tonight in this panel. The second piece, the second ingredient for building resilience is fostering connection. And we heard that again and again in our panel this evening about how critical that is during this post-high school launch period. The third element around building resilience in this mantra or this model we talk about is creating predictability. So whether that's, for your student in getting to college and setting up a predictable schedule or routine, or if it's for your student who's doing an alternative to college and having another schedule for predictability. The fourth ingredient is modeling moderation. And we heard echoes of that in the panel from everybody tonight, again, and how critical that is during times of stress, to just practice slowing down, taking time, just sort of possibly tweaking your expectations of yourself or your child, and really modeling and living that moderation. And the last is some sense of agency and in the life of your young person, your student, or yourself. What is within my control? What's in my sphere of control that I can practice agency and controllability. And finally, I just want to say, as we come to an end, any parent, caregiver that's watching this tonight that has a child in the K-12 system, we offer free support groups during the week. And we have 3 groups a week that are open to any parent, whether you're connected to BRYT or not, any parent in the K-12 system. So we have 3 open to anybody. We have 1 a week that's in Spanish, and 1 for BIPOC parents or caregivers. So parents and caregivers of color. So there's an affinity group. So those are free. Sue or Caitlin is going to drop the link for the flyer. Those are virtual support groups. They happen every week. They're open to any parent or caregiver that has a child in the K-12 system. And I just want to say another huge thank you to the panelists. Thank you, thank you. That was incredible information. I'm also the parent of a junior in high school, so I was taking so much wisdom out of everything that people were saying, and I'm so grateful. And thank you so much to the Family Engagement Team who facilitated the event, who are also the facilitators of these free weekly support groups. So with that, I will say good night and thank you so much to everybody.